We have about 10 minutes left. I want to go to illegal and legal in the realm of copyright, which was obviously, that was your shtick for a long time and still is to a great degree. You're the guy who has a point of view, whether it was through Creative Commons or the work you did out of Stanford, the advocating you've done on behalf of. I think the Sonny Bono extension of the copyright law and your arguments against that were just magnificent and interesting. Can you, in a sort of short form, articulate what you think the rest of us should think about this stuff, about copyright and intellectual property and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so there are a lot of copyright abolitionists out there who think that copyright was for the 19th and 20th century, we should get rid of it. I'm not one of those. I think copyright's an essential part of a rich culture. And I don't mean rich financially, I mean rich as in diverse. We have to
vibrant.
Artists have got to have a way to fund their creativity. And if they don't, they become just patrons to big companies, and that's completely boring. So I think copyright is essential. But what you need to recognize is that copyright used to have one problem to solve. How do I give incentives to artists to create great new work? Now copyright has two problems to solve. How do we give incentives to artists, but how do we leave enough freedom for amateurs to be able to create and share work consistent with the law, right? So you look at the last 5 years and the enormous creativity that's evinced on YouTube or on blogs or all this sort of stuff by people who are creating not for money, but they're just creating because they love to create, the original sense of what the word amateur means. And we've got to look at that and say, we need a system that can ratify and encourage that. We need to be able to teach that in our schools without the general counsel for the local school district saying, oh, no, there's too much risk of copyright infringement lawsuits if we allow kids to remix videos and post them on YouTube. We need to be able to make this kind of cultural expression as normal as writing is. And the only way to do that is to update copyright law to more properly focus on the thing it needs to worry about to create artists.
Which is?
Which is to make sure when artists' work is commercially exploited, the artist profits from it.
So it's about protection.
It's about protection.
A word I didn't hear earlier in the description of what the purpose of copyright is, but
well, protection might be a little bit too fuzzy. I want to make sure that the system is giving compensation where it's supposed to be giving compensation. So, we've been waging a war, for example, over the last 10 years against peer-to-peer file sharing of illegal copyright.
We, the royal we. Not you personally.
Not me personally. They haven't allowed me to be part of that war, but but we as in the nation. I don't support people filing other people's copyright. My books have repeatedly said don't do this. Okay, but we've been waging war against it unsuccessfully for 10 years. It's our Vietnam. It's our cultural Vietnam. Now, what do you do when you wage an unsuccessful war? Well, one strategy is let's wage an ever more effective war against the enemy, like more bombs, more. My view is when a war fails, you have to sue for peace and find a different way to achieve your objectives. And there's obvious different ways that we've been talking about for a decade. So, compulsory licensing schemes that would allow us to figure out how much harm has been done by this and to allocate money that we've collected from the licensing scheme to artists to compensate for that harm. If we had done that 10 years ago, artists would have had more money. Businesses would have been able to innovate much more effectively because they would have had a clear set of rules. But the most important thing to me is we wouldn't have a generation of kids who have been raised as criminals. Because what we've told our kids is the stuff that they do naturally is criminal. And they are
felons. In fact, some of them have actually been they've attempted to prosecute them, right?
Course,
literal criminal. Right?
So they're told they're criminal. They think to themselves, okay, I'm a criminal. And they live life as a criminal. And that is, in my view, corrosive. Right? I was a little bit of a goody two-shoes in high school, I'll admit. I wasn't such an extreme one. But, when I was in high school, I could do all the normal things that high school kids did and very rarely break the law. That's not true of our kids today.
But the question I'd have and that others would have for you is the problem the law or is the problem the crime?
The problem is the law. In the early part of this last century, the law was that property rights extended from the ground to the skies. And when you crossed over in the air, you were trespassing just as much as if you crossed on the ground. Then a technology called the airplane was invented. And airplanes started flying across the air. And in certain cases, people on the ground claimed, that's a trespass on my property. You haven't asked permission to enter in my property. And so a case went to the Supreme Court when some chicken farmers were complaining because the Air Force was landing planes right over their property and causing the chickens to fly into the wall and kill themselves. So it was a serious problem for these farmers. But they said, you're violating my property rights, and I want you to stop. And the Supreme Court said common sense repels at the idea that what we're going to do is now stop airplane travel because these old systems of property rights block it. What we're going to do is update the system of property rights. And that's what's going to happen with copyright. It's not that we need to eliminate property. It's not that we need to eliminate copyright. We need to look at the way copyright interacts with our technology and to update it so it makes sense. Right? In the old days, you could go through your whole day never once triggering copyright law. Because, when you're working with a book, for example, you read a book, that's not a fair use of the book, it's a free use of the book. You haven't produced a copy. I give you a book, I haven't produced a copy. There's no triggering of copyright law. But in digital space, every time you do anything, you produce a copy, which means every time you do anything, you trigger the application of copyright law. So we go from a world where most of what consumers do is completely invisible to copyright law to a world where everything every consumer does, every single moment of the time that is in the internet, triggers copyright law. Copyright law was not written to regulate ordinary citizens in their ordinary consumption of culture. That's not what it was for. And so we just need to update it so it focuses on the thing it needs to focus on to guarantee artists get the money they need to be creative.
So journalists who claim that an aggregation website, Huffington Post say, takes 5 paragraphs of a story that they publish in their world and reprint it there without permission, and then that's a violation of copyright. In the new Lessig world, how would that be resolved?
It's a hard question because Huffington Post is a successful commercial venture. They depend upon something called fair use for a lot of they have agreements in a whole bunch of countries. But fair use, which is, the Supreme Court said, a fundamental First Amendment requirement in copyright law. Fair use says I'm allowed to use certain things.
A certain amount.
Yeah, certain amount without permission. And that means even if you say I can't use it, I'm allowed to use it. So I think fair use is an essential part to any system of copyright, and I think we depend upon it in all sorts of contexts and need to.
Yeah. This is a hard thing to fix, though, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to fix, but I'm acknowledging that it's an uphill battle.
I spent many, many years fighting this issue. And what I saw is parents got it, teachers got it, business got it, artists got it. The only people who didn't get it were congressmen.
Now, come back to the first part of the conversation.
Yeah. Did they not get it because they're idiots? No. They didn't get it because there's no money on this side of the issue. So that's what led me to say, okay, we got to go focus on this money issue if we're ever going to deal sensibly with that issue. So I don't think the copyright issue is hard. No. I think we could fix that if we sat down seriously with all parties at a table in a relatively short period of time. There's some hard questions, but not many. But we're never going to be allowed to do that because all the money in the world is into preserving the war against our kids and fighting that ever more viciously so that some 19th and 20th century system of business continues into the 21st.
I can't tell if I'm optimistic or pessimistic after talking to you. I suspect that happens occasionally, but I appreciate the fact that you gave us the time to be here. We're out of time. Fascinating stuff. Good luck with all of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for fighting on all of our behalfs. I guess that's the most important thing I can say. So,
thank you,
Lawrence Lessig, good to see you. All right, thank you.
Funding for Overheard with Evan Smith is provided in part by Hilco Partners, Texas Government Affairs Consultancy, and its global healthcare consulting business unit, Hilco Health, and by the Matson McHale Foundation in support of public television, and also by MFI Foundation, improving the quality of life within our community, and also by the Alice Kleberg Reynolds Foundation. And viewers like you, thank you.